December 2020. A single $20,000 check, written 11 years earlier for a company almost nobody wanted to fund, quietly turns into a fortune overnight. The investor who approved it almost said no. This is the story of Airbnb, not the version about air mattresses and strangers' apartments, but the story of the investor who almost passed on the deal, and the 6% stake that changed everything. Paul Graham co-founded Y Combinator, a Silicon Valley program that funds startups too small and too strange for anyone else to take seriously. In January 2009, three broke founders walk into his office with an idea he genuinely dislikes. He almost rejects them on the spot. What eventually changes his mind isn't the business plan at all. It's something these three founders had already done, months earlier, just to keep their rent paid. To understand why Paul Graham nearly turned them away, rewind further, to a cramped San Francisco apartment in 2007, two men behind on rent, one air mattress, and no real plan except surviving the month. It's October 2007. The rent is due in days. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, two design school friends sharing that apartment, have exactly one desperate idea left to make money. A major industrial design conference is coming to San Francisco, and every hotel room in the city sells out weeks in advance. Chesky and Gebbia have an idea: inflate 3 air mattresses on their apartment floor and rent them out. They call it Air Bed and Breakfast. 3 strangers attending the conference pay $80 a night each to sleep on the living room floor, and breakfast is whatever cereal happens to be in the cupboard. It covers the rent. Encouraged, they bring in a third person, Nathan Blecherczyk, an engineer who can actually code. Together the three of them try to turn a one-time rent-saving trick into an actual website people can book through. Almost nobody takes them seriously. The investors they email don't reply. The idea letting a total stranger sleep inside your own apartment sounds less like a business and more like a lawsuit waiting to happen. By the summer of 2008, the site has barely any users and the founders are nearly out of savings. Most people, at this point, would fold the company and go get a normal job. Then the 2008 presidential election gives them one strange lifeline. Barack Obama and John McCain are on every magazine cover in America. So the founders decide, half-jokingly, to design breakfast cereal boxes with their faces on them. They call them Obama O's and Captain McCain's, hand-assembling the boxes late at night in their apartment and selling them for around $40 a box at the Democratic National Convention in Denver. It sounds absurd. It works. The cereal stunt raises around $30,000, just enough to keep the company's lights on for a few more desperate months. It also proves something no spreadsheet ever could: when the business is about to die, these three founders don't quit. They improvise, sell cereal by hand, and find a way to survive one more month. In January 2009, with almost no cash left, they apply to Y Combinator, a 3-month program that funds startups too early and too unproven for any bank or venture firm to touch. Paul Graham reads their application and is not impressed. Strangers renting air mattresses on the floor of someone else's apartment strikes him as one of the worst startup ideas he has ever come across. He almost doesn't bother granting them an interview. Y Combinator receives hundreds of applications every cycle and accepts only a small fraction of them. This one, on paper, reads like a joke. But one detail in the application stops him: the cereal boxes. A team broke enough to sell novelty cereal door to door, and disciplined enough to raise $30,000 doing it. That's not nothing. He invites them in for an interview in a small conference room in Mountain View. Chesky, Gebbia, and Blecherczyk sit across the table and admit, honestly, that almost nobody uses their site yet. Graham asks the obvious question: why would any stranger let another stranger sleep inside their own home? The founders don't have a slick answer prepared. They just genuinely believe it. What actually convinces Graham isn't the pitch itself. It's the serial story, told back to him in that small room. He realizes these three will do almost anything to keep this company breathing. Years later, Graham describes the founders as unusually relentless, the kind of people who refuse to let an idea die, no matter how many times the market tells them no. Weeks later, Graham makes his decision. Y Combinator accepts Air Bed and Breakfast into its winter 2009 batch, betting on the founders even though almost nobody thinks the idea itself will ever work. Y Combinator's deal is always shaped the same way: a small check, in exchange for a real piece of the company, made before anyone else believes the company is worth anything at all. For Air Bed and Breakfast, that check comes to $20,000. In exchange, Y Combinator takes a 6% ownership stake in the company the founders are still barely holding together. At the time, 6% of this company is worth almost nothing on paper. There's no real revenue yet, and most investors still consider the whole business a novelty at best. Graham isn't really betting on Air mattresses. He's betting on three founders who already proved, with a cereal box scheme, that they will sell almost anything before they let a company die. Outside Y Combinator, skepticism only deepens. Several well-known venture capital firms in Silicon Valley and New York pass entirely on funding the founders, unconvinced anyone will actually pay a stranger to sleep in their home. New York investor Fred Wilson later admits publicly that turning down Airbnb's early funding round is one of the biggest misses of his entire career. At the time, it just looked like a quiet way to lose money. Y Combinator's $20,000 check is now the only serious financial backing keeping the company alive. If the founders fail, it's a forgotten footnote. If they succeed, nobody yet has any real idea how enormous that 6% could become. The Y Combinator check buys the founders time, not success. For the next year, Air Bed and Breakfast barely grows at all. Some weeks the site books almost zero reservations anywhere in the country. The founders move into a cheap shared apartment and keep bleeding through their own personal savings. Chesky reportedly maxes out several credit cards just to keep the basic lights and servers running. Graham stays in touch through Y Combinator's network, watching a company that, by every normal business metric, should probably have already failed months earlier. Some staff privately doubt it survives the batch. The eventual turning point comes from an unglamorous fix. The listing photos on the site are terrible, grainy, poorly lit pictures of spare rooms that are quietly killing every booking before it happens. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what happens when this bet finally pays off. So the founders start flying to New York themselves, borrowing a decent camera, and photographing listings professionally, one apartment building at a time, teaching themselves lighting as they go. Within weeks, bookings in New York roughly double. It's the first real proof that the entire business model actually works. People will book a stranger's home, as long as it looks trustworthy in photos. It's a small, unglamorous fix, hardly the stuff of a founding myth. But it's the first genuine sign that a strange idea has an actual, scalable business quietly hiding inside it. By 2010, the company renamed simply Airbnb. No More Air Mattresses required raises a bigger round from Sequoia Capital, one of Silicon Valley's most respected venture firms, at a valuation near $70 million. Y Combinator's original 6% stake, once treated as a favor to three struggling founders, is now attached to a company that venture capitalists across the industry are suddenly fighting hard to get into. By 2011, Airbnb is expanding rapidly into international cities across Europe and Asia, and Y Combinator's original stake, 6% before dilution from later funding rounds, is already worth a genuine small fortune on paper. Every new funding round dilutes that exact percentage a little further. But each round also multiplies the entire company's total value by many times over, so the actual dollar amount only keeps climbing. By 2015, Airbnb is valued at roughly $25 billion. The strange idea that started with 3 inflated air mattresses is now worth more than most major hotel chains on the planet combined. Ordinary homeowners around the world start listing spare rooms, boats, treehouses, and even entire castles, quietly turning empty and used space into a brand new kind of income nobody had really monetized before. Graham has long since stepped back from running Y Combinator day-to-day operations himself. But the firm he co-founded still holds a piece of a company he had almost turned away back in 2009. By 2019, Airbnb lists homes in almost every country in the world. It has quietly become one of the largest travel companies on the entire planet without ever owning a single hotel room. Then, in December 2020, Airbnb finally announces it's going public on the stock market. Wall Street sets an initial share price of $68. Nobody, including the founders themselves, is fully sure how investors will react. On the morning of the listing, the opening trade comes in near $146 a share, more than double the initial price. Airbnb's total value jumps past $100 billion within hours. For Chesky, Jebbia, and Blecharczyk, it's total vindication after years of investors telling them, over and over, that the whole idea would never actually work. For Paul Graham, sitting at home, it's something else entirely, a $20,000 Y Combinator bet from 11 years earlier, on a company he had personally almost rejected, now worth an amount that would take most people several lifetimes to earn. Y Combinator's diluted stake, once 6% of a company that was worth almost nothing, is now worth an extraordinary fortune, realized on a single wild trading day. The 3 founders who once hand-sold novelty cereal boxes just to cover rent are now worth billions of dollars each. The air mattresses are long gone. The company is now simply a global fact of life. Graham later says the real lesson was never that the idea itself was good. On paper, it still sounds strange, letting strangers sleep inside strangers' homes. The lesson was about the founders, never about the pitch. He backed 3 people who, when the entire business was dying, sold novelty cereal door to door instead of quietly giving up. That single instinct, he later says, is what actually paid off. Y Combinator has since used that exact same playbook on hundreds of other founders. Fund the actual person in front of you, not just the pitch, long before the market agrees there's anything worth funding at all. So here's the question worth sitting with. How many good ideas have you personally dismissed not because the idea itself was bad, but because you judged it before you ever saw who was actually behind it?